She found him where the soil cracked with drought and silence, just like her father said she would. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The soil cracked beneath Nathan's boots like broken glass. Another morning, another sky too empty for rain. He stopped at the edge of the field, hands on his hips, scanning the horizon like he had 1,000 times before, as if the clouds might finally decide to remember him. But the sun was already climbing, merciless, unapologetic, and the air carried the smell of dust and dying things. He exhaled, slow and steady, and wiped the sweat from his brow even though it was barely past 7. The old Hayes farm had been in his family since before the war, long before banks started circling like buzzards and fields stopped giving what they used to. Nathan remembered a time when the corn grew high and thick, when laughter filled the porch swing and the barn echoed with the sounds of work and life. Now it was quieter, the kind of quiet that sinks into your bones and starts to feel permanent. He passed the barn on his way to the coop, giving a pat to the aging beagle lying in the shade like a worn-out patch of fur and loyalty. Rusty lifted his head, thumped his tail once, then drifted back to sleep. Even the dog seemed tired of hoping. Inside the house, June had already left for the day, catching a ride to summer school with her friend's mom. She'd left a note on the table in her looping, awkward handwriting. "Eggs in the fridge. Don't forget to eat. June." He stared at the heart she'd drawn, feeling both warmed and quietly gutted by it. His 13-year-old was growing up too fast, too responsible, too aware of how fragile their world had become. The bills were stacked near the sink, unopened but loud in their silence. Nathan knew what they said. He didn't need to read another final notice to feel its weight. The loan was due in 6 weeks, and the crop, what little had survived, wasn't going to cover it. Still, he grabbed his hat, stepped back outside, and did what he always did. He kept going. Because giving up wasn't in his blood, and even dry soil had a memory of rain. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, just a pale orange blush across the edge of the fields, casting long, sleepy shadows over the rows of stunted corn. Nathan walked with a slow, practiced rhythm, boots crunching over the brittle remnants of last year's hope. He had come out to check the irrigation line again, not because he expected anything to have changed, but because doing something felt better than doing nothing. But as he neared the bend by the old oak tree, he stopped. There was movement. Not the rustle of wind or the flicker of a rabbit darting through stalks. This was different. He squinted through the early haze, and that's when he saw her. A woman sitting in the dirt. She was half hidden between the rows, knees drawn up to her chest, arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to disappear. Her clothes were stained with mud and dust, her hair pulled loose and tangled around her shoulders, and even from a distance, Nathan could see she was crying. He hesitated. 100 questions pushed to the front of his mind. Was she hurt? Was she lost? Was this real? But none of them mattered as much as the one that rose up from somewhere deeper, something strange and impossible. How did she know his name? Because as he stepped closer, her head lifted. Her eyes were red, but sharp, focused. She looked at him like she had been expecting him. "Nathan Hayes?" Her voice cracked around the words, barely above a whisper. He nodded slowly, still trying to make sense of the scene. "That's me." She stood up shakily, brushing dirt from her jeans with trembling hands. "I didn't think I'd actually find you." He blinked. "Do I know you?" She let out a breath that sounded like it carried years of weight. "No, but my father did." The wind picked up just then, rustling the dry stalks around them, and Nathan felt the strange sense that the past had just walked straight out of the ground and stood in front of him, alive, crying, and calling his name. The woman's hands were still shaking as she stepped fully into the morning light. Her eyes, though red from crying, had a steadiness to them now, like she'd found something after a long time wandering. She didn't look lost anymore, just raw, like someone who had finally arrived where they were supposed to be, but didn't know what came next. "I'm Claire," she said, voice quiet but firm. "Claire Benton." Nathan turned the name over in his mind, searching for a match that didn't come. Nothing about her looked familiar, no connection he could pull from memory, no face he could place. Still, she looked at him like she already knew him. "My dad was Thomas Benton," she added, watching him carefully. "You helped him once, a long time ago." Nathan's brow furrowed. The name hit like a faint echo, not sharp enough to recall, but not entirely foreign either. "Thomas Benton," he said slowly. "Where was this?" She swallowed. "He said it was right after he got back from the war. He was hitchhiking home, beat up, broke, didn't know where he was going. He collapsed somewhere near this town. He told me a farmer found him, gave him a place to rest, fixed him a meal, and never asked for anything in return, said he never even got the man's full name." Nathan shifted his weight, his boots pressing deeper into the dirt. "I've helped a few people over the years," he said, not out of pride, but memory. "That kind of thing. That wasn't unusual back then." Claire nodded. "But my dad never forgot it. He told me that moment changed everything for him. He said it gave him back his faith in people. He wrote about it in his journals, talked about this farmer like he was some kind of ghost, someone he never expected to meet again. But before he passed, he told me that if I ever needed to remember what real kindness looked like, to come find the man on the Hayes farm." Nathan looked down at the dry ground, then back at her. His throat felt tight. He didn't remember Thomas Benton, not clearly, but he knew the kind of man he used to be, the kind who didn't think twice about helping someone up from the dirt. And now, decades later, the past had returned to his doorstep, not as a memory, but as someone's daughter standing in his field, hoping the stories were true. Nathan invited her back to the house, though the invitation came with more silence than words. Claire followed without hesitation, her boots heavy with dried mud, her arms wrapped around herself like she wasn't sure if she was cold or just holding something in. The screen door creaked as they stepped into the old farmhouse, the air inside cooler, but still tinged with the scent of earth, coffee, and old wood. It was the kind of place where stories lingered in the walls, even if no one was talking. Claire sat at the kitchen table, fingers nervously brushing the rim of her coffee mug. Nathan stayed standing, one hand resting on the back of a chair, waiting without pressing. She reached into her bag and pulled out a worn envelope, its edges curled, the paper yellowed with time. The handwriting across the front was neat, deliberate. "To my daughter, if she ever finds him." She slid it across the table toward him. "I didn't read it until after the funeral," she said, her voice low, steadying itself against grief. "It was sealed in a box marked, 'For Claire's eyes only.' He never talked much about the war, not in detail, but this is the story he never stopped carrying." Nathan picked it up carefully, like it might fall apart in his hands. He opened it and began to read. The letter told of a roadside in the middle of nowhere. A young soldier, recently discharged and trying to make it home, too proud to ask for help and too broken to know he needed it. A farm truck that pulled over. A man with sunburned arms and calloused hands who asked no questions, only offered a hand and a hot meal. No names exchanged, no promises made. Just a single night in the safety of a stranger's kindness. The next morning the soldier was gone before sunrise, but he never forgot the gesture. Nathan set the letter down, his fingers lingering on the page. He didn't remember the name, but he remembered that season, late summer, years ago. He remembered the way people drifted through, wounded in ways that didn't always show. And he remembered helping one man who had collapsed near the edge of the east fence line. "I think I remember," he said, almost to himself. Not his name, but the look in his eyes, like he'd seen more than he could hold. Claire nodded, swallowing the emotion tightening her throat. He said that moment saved him, said it reminded him there were still good people out there. That one act kept him going when nothing else could. Outside, the wind stirred the dry stalks of corn, whispering through the cracks in the windows. And inside the quiet farmhouse, A debt of gratitude buried in soil and time was finally starting to rise again. The letter still sat on the table between them, its paper curling slightly at the edges, as if it, too, was tired from the weight it carried. Nathan rubbed the back of his neck, unsure of what to say next. His instinct told him to thank her for coming, to send her on her way with a nod and a polite goodbye. But instinct didn't account for the look on Claire's face, the quiet exhaustion, the way her eyes kept drifting toward the window like she didn't really have a place to go. He stood, walked to the sink, and poured himself a glass of water, buying time. It wasn't that he didn't believe her. It was that he didn't know what to do with the way her presence stirred up parts of his life he'd carefully boxed up and left alone. She hadn't asked for anything, not even after sharing something that personal. She just sat there, calm now, tracing the rim of her mug like she was trying to make sense of her own footsteps. "You passing through?" he asked without turning around. Claire hesitated. "Not really. I booked a room in town, but the motel said they were overbooked when I got in last night. I ended up sleeping in my car." That landed hard. He turned then, frowning. "You slept in your car last night?" She nodded, giving a small shrug like it wasn't worth a fuss. "Didn't think it would matter. I needed to find this place." Nathan leaned against the counter, arms crossed. He didn't like the idea of anyone sleeping out on some back road, let alone someone clearly carrying her father's memory like a second skin. "There's a guest room," he said finally, the words gruff but not unkind. "It's nothing fancy. Just an old bed, clean sheets, better than a car." Claire looked up, surprised. "Are you sure?" He nodded, eyes steady on hers. "You came all this way. You don't have to sleep behind a steering wheel." She smiled softly, the first real smile since she arrived. "Thank you." He gave a small grunt in reply and turned to grab his keys. "I've got to feed the animals before dark. Make yourself at home. Just don't open the left cabinet under the sink. Pipes leak." Claire let out a small laugh, and something about it eased the room. Not entirely, but enough. As Nathan stepped out into the evening light, he shook his head to himself. He didn't know what this was, or why it was happening now. But a part of him, quiet and cautious, hoped that maybe, just maybe, some stories didn't end when the page turned. Maybe they circled back, asking to be finished. June came home just as the sun dipped behind the tree line, its last light casting golden streaks across the dusty windows of the farmhouse. Nathan was outside stacking feed bags when he heard the crunch of bicycle tires over gravel. She kicked the stand down with a practiced motion, backpack slung over one shoulder, hair wild from the ride. "Hey, kiddo," he said, brushing his hands off on his jeans. June gave him a half smile, the kind that always felt more like a question than a greeting. She looked older than 13 in moments like this. Too serious, too quiet. "Hey, Dad," she said. "Who's the car belong to?" Nathan straightened, glancing toward the edge of the barn where Claire's rental sat under a low-hanging tree. "We've got a visitor," he said carefully. "Name's Claire. She's staying in the guest room tonight." June's eyes narrowed. "Since when do we have visitors?" Nathan sighed, tugging off his gloves. "Long story. Her father, he knew me back when I was younger. She came here looking for answers." June stood still, letting that settle. She didn't say anything, but the flicker in her eyes gave her away, an uneasiness she didn't bother to hide. Inside the house, Claire was just setting her bag down when June stepped through the front door. Their eyes met. Claire straightened, offering a gentle smile. "You must be June." June didn't answer right away. She looked her over. The nice clothes, the too perfect hair for someone who'd supposedly slept in her car, the way she took up space like she belonged there. Nathan came in behind her, catching the tension. "Claire, this is my daughter, June. June Claire." "Nice to meet you," Claire offered again, this time more softly. June nodded slowly. "Yeah, you too." But the words felt borrowed, temporary. Later, while they sat at the dinner table eating leftover stew, June stayed mostly silent, watching Claire with the kind of quiet that wasn't shy, just measured. She asked questions with her eyes, ones she wasn't quite ready to say out loud. Afterward, as Nathan tucked her in for the night, she finally spoke. "Is she staying long?" "Just for a bit," he said, brushing hair from her forehead. "She's not here to cause trouble." June looked at him, her voice small. "We were okay before. Just us." Nathan nodded, heart tugging. "We're still okay." She rolled to her side, pulling the blanket up tight. "I just don't want anything changing. Not again." Nathan sat there in the quiet, the old ache rising in his chest, the one that came every time he saw his daughter guard her world like a tiny fortress. Claire had arrived with questions from the past. But in Emily's shadow, Nathan saw a different challenge, the future he was trying to protect. Morning brought with it the scent of dew on old wood and something frying faintly in the kitchen. Bacon, maybe, or whatever Nathan could afford that week. Claire blinked into the soft light pouring through the guest room window. The lace curtain fluttered like a whisper in the breeze. She sat up slowly, stretching, and glanced around. The walls were yellowed with time, decorated only by a quilt hung like a memory and a single bookshelf holding dusty paperbacks. It wasn't much, but it felt strangely safe, like the house was gently holding itself together out of habit, not strength. She padded barefoot down the hall, following the smell and the sound of coffee brewing. Nathan stood at the stove, flipping something in a cast-iron pan with the kind of efficiency that said this had been his routine for years. He didn't look over when she entered. "Hope you're not too picky," he said. "We eat what we've got." Claire smiled faintly. "I'm just grateful to not be eating granola bars in a gas station parking lot." Nathan grunted, a sound that might have meant agreement or just acknowledgement. After breakfast, she stepped outside for the first real look at the farm. It was bigger than she expected. Fields stretched far in every direction, though many were overgrown and browned at the edges like they were holding their breath. The barn leaned slightly to one side, its paint long peeled by years of sun and storm. A rusted windmill stood watch over the land, squeaking faintly with each spin. Chickens wandered near the coop, their feathers dusted and ragged. Everything looked like it had once been something great. Now it just looked tired. Still, there was beauty in it, not the kind you take photos of, but the kind that sticks to your chest and hums quietly there. Nathan was already in the shed, organizing tools. "Let me help," she said, stepping in beside him. He raised an eyebrow. "You ever milk a goat? Fix a busted irrigation hose?" "Nope," she said, brushing a cobweb off her sleeve. "But I've cleaned up my fair share of messes, and I'm not made of glass." Nathan considered that, then handed her a pair of gloves. "Don't say I didn't warn you." The hours passed in a rhythm she didn't know she'd missed. They repaired the chicken wire, cleared weeds from a section of the fence line, and she even helped gather eggs, flinching only once when a hen pecked her wrist. Her city shoes were ruined by noon, and her hair clung to her neck with sweat and grit. But Claire didn't complain, because for the first time in a long time, she wasn't running from anything. She was just doing. And with every wheelbarrow she pushed, every tool she handed Nathan, she felt something waking up in her. Not purpose exactly, but presence. This forgotten farm had a heartbeat. Faint, faded, but real. And she wanted to hear more of it. The shed sat tucked behind the barn, half swallowed by tall grass and a stubborn honeysuckle vine that climbed over its roof like it had claimed the place. Claire had wandered out that way in the late afternoon, chasing the shade and a bit of curiosity. She pushed open the warped wooden door, which groaned in protest, and stepped into the soft gloom. Dust floated through the beams of sunlight that slipped between the slats, dancing like memories not quite ready to rest. Inside it smelled like time. Rust, oil, wood, and something faintly sweet beneath it all, maybe old apples or forgotten hay. Her eyes adjusted slowly, and then she saw it. Tucked against the wall, an upright piano, its surface dulled with neglect. Its keys were yellowed, a few chipped at the edges. Someone had once tried to protect it with a tarp, but the fabric had sagged and torn, letting in years of dust. Beside it sat a tractor, large, red, and clearly lifeless. Its tires were half deflated, and vines had begun creeping up around its rear axle. Claire stepped closer, running her fingers gently along the fender, feeling the heat from the sun still clinging to the metal. She heard footsteps behind her and turned. Nathan stood in the doorway, wiping his hands on a rag, his expression unreadable. "You found the graveyard," he said, voice quiet. Claire looked between the two relics. "They feel like they're waiting." Nathan stepped inside, glancing at the tractor. "That thing belonged to my grandfather. He taught me how to drive on it when I was 10. Engine finally gave out about 5 years ago. I keep telling myself I'll fix it, just never got around to it." She nodded toward the piano. "And this?" Nathan's face shifted. A softness, a hesitation. "That was Emily's." He said the name so gently it nearly floated. "My wife." Claire's gaze dropped to the keys. She played? Every night, even when things were tough, especially then. He stepped closer, looking at it like it hurt to see. She said it kept the silence from feeling empty. Claire pressed a single key. It made a sound, muted, off-key, but still a sound. "She must have been something," she whispered. "She was," Nathan replied, eyes lingering on the dust-covered lid. "She filled this place with music, even when the lights were out." Silence settled between them, thick with things unsaid. Claire rested her hand on the top of the piano, and for the first time she understood what kind of home this was. Not just built from wood and nails, but held together by memory, a place where even broken things still had a place, still mattered. And somehow, in that forgotten shed, standing between the past and what might come next, Claire felt like she'd found something that hadn't been offered in a long time. Belonging. The air changed before the sky did. That kind of stillness that makes your skin prickle like the world is holding its breath. Claire had been helping Nathan clear debris from the edge of the east field, stacking broken limbs from last month's windstorm into neat piles when she noticed the breeze die. Then came the scent, sharp, metallic, electric. Rain was coming, and fast. Nathan stood up straight from where he'd been tightening a fence post, eyes scanning the horizon. The sky in the distance had shifted to a heavy steel gray, clouds boiling up from behind the ridge like something angry was waking up. "That's not just a passing drizzle," he muttered. Claire wiped sweat from her forehead and followed his gaze. "What do we do?" He didn't hesitate. "We move. Fast. That field dips. If it floods, we'll lose what little crop survived last week's heat wave." She didn't ask questions. Didn't need to. They ran together toward the shed, grabbing sandbags, tarps, and whatever else Nathan barked out like muscle memory. Claire's arms strained, legs aching as they dragged heavy bags into the tractor ruts and the low parts of the rows. The wind picked up with a howl, flinging her hair across her face. By the time the first drop hit her shoulder, it felt like a warning shot. Then the sky opened. The rain came down like it had been waiting months. It soaked through her shirt, through her jeans, down her back, and into her boots. Claire's hand slipped over the wet burlap, mud swallowing her feet with every step. Nathan shouted something through the roar of the downpour, pointing toward a section of pipe that had burst loose. She didn't hear it, but she saw the panic in his eyes. Together, they sprinted to the irrigation line. He dropped to one knee, trying to hold the connector in place while she braced the pipe from the other side. Mud sucked at their knees, thunder cracked overhead, but they held it together until the line finally sealed. They collapsed onto the grass moments later, breathing hard, soaked to the bone, faces streaked with grit and rain. Claire laughed first, sharp, breathless, and unexpected. Nathan looked at her like she was some kind of miracle. "You laugh during storms?" I think I just survived my first farm flood, she said between gasps. I'm allowed to laugh. He chuckled too then, shoulders shaking with a release that had nothing to do with humor and everything to do with survival. The storm raged on, but something had shifted between them. Not just trust, but a strange sense of rhythm, like they'd passed some unspoken test together. And for the first time, Claire didn't feel like a guest anymore. She felt like someone who belonged in the storm. The rain slowed to a whisper sometime near dusk, leaving behind a world that looked freshly wrung out, glassy puddles scattered across the fields, gutters overflowing, and air thick with the scent of wet soil and crushed grass. Claire and Nathan trudged back toward the farmhouse in silence, their boots squelching with every step, caked in thick mud. The storm had passed, but it had left its fingerprints on everything. Nathan reached the porch first and turned to look at her. Claire paused at the bottom step, lifting one boot and laughing softly at the sludge dripping from it. I don't think these were made for farmland, she said, swaying a little as she tried to pry the boot off without losing her balance. City shoes, Nathan teased, already unlacing his own. She raised an eyebrow. That obvious, huh? Only when they try to fight back. He extended a hand to steady her, and she took it, hesitating just a second before their palms met. His grip was firm, calloused, real. With one tug, her boot came free, sending her off balance and into a brief stumble that landed her shoulder against his chest. They both froze. Then Claire laughed, a short, bright sound that didn't feel like it belonged to someone just covered in mud. Nathan chuckled too, awkward and low, his cheeks tinged with a color the sky hadn't managed to steal yet. She pulled back gently, wiping a smudge from her cheek. Sorry, I'm not usually this clumsy. Storms'll do that, he said, nodding toward the horizon. Knock things loose. Claire sank onto the porch step, breathing in the fresh, heavy air. Nathan sat beside her, boots lined up in front of them like a pair of surrendered soldiers. For a moment, the only sound was the soft drip of rain from the porch awning. I was supposed to get married, she said suddenly. Nathan looked over. Not surprised exactly, just patient. 3 months ago, she continued, picking at a loose thread on her sleeve. He was good on paper, wealthy, charming, said all the right things. But somewhere between the engagement party and the final cake tasting, I realized he never asked who I was when no one was watching. He just wanted someone to match his suit. Nathan nodded slowly. And now you're here. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Now I'm here, in muddy boots, sitting next to a man who fixes irrigation lines in the middle of lightning storms. He didn't say anything, didn't need to. Claire leaned back on her elbows, letting the last of the sun warm her face. Funny how life reroutes you when you're not paying attention. Nathan glanced over at her, his voice low. Sometimes the detours take you where you were supposed to be all along. And there, on a porch that had seen too many quiet nights, a new kind of silence settled. Not heavy, not awkward, just honest. The morning after the storm felt almost like a reset, clouds still hanging low, the earth still soaked and heavy, but the light had softened. The air smelled like possibility. Nathan stood at the kitchen counter pouring coffee into 2 chipped mugs when Claire walked in, hair damp from a quick rinse and wearing a flannel shirt that clearly wasn't hers. It hung on her like borrowed peace. She looked around the kitchen like she was trying to memorize it. Every creak, every corner, every silence. Thanks for not kicking me out after I nearly wrecked your fence and drowned your field, she said with a half smile. Nathan passed her a mug. You didn't wreck it, just gave it character. Claire took a sip and nodded toward the window. I can help. Not just for today, but if you want, I'll stay for a little while. A week, maybe. You've got your hands full here. Nathan leaned against the sink, watching her. She didn't look like someone angling for pity. No desperation, no performance. Just steady-eyed and strangely grounded for someone still dripping pieces of her life behind her. You don't have to do that, he said. You're not in debt to me." "I know," she replied, "but I need something to do, something real, and you clearly need another pair of hands." He looked at her over the rim of his cup. "You ever mend a fence line?" "Nope." "Chase a rogue chicken?" "Only in heels once. It was a disaster." Nathan allowed himself the barest hint of a smirk. "This isn't a vacation. I don't have time to babysit." "I'm not asking you to," she said. "Just let me stay a week. I'll work. I'll earn it. And after that, if you want me gone, I'll go." He stared at her for a long moment, something turning slowly in his chest. Trust wasn't something he gave out lightly anymore, not since losing Emily, not since watching friends drift away in hard seasons. But something about Claire's voice didn't ask for trust. It asked for a chance. Finally, he exhaled. "1 week. You help with chores. No special treatment." "Deal," she said, offering her hand across the table. He hesitated, then shook it. And in that simple handshake between two strangers who didn't quite know where they belonged, the air in the kitchen shifted just a little. Not toward certainty, but toward something willing to grow. The envelope was thinner than the first. No dramatic warnings on the outside. No, for Claire's eyes only. Just her name, written in her father's steady, all-caps handwriting, the kind he used when he wanted to make sure nothing was misunderstood. She found it tucked into the side pocket of her travel bag, wedged beneath a forgotten paperback and a worn-out charger cord, like it had been waiting for her to slow down long enough to notice it. Claire sat on the edge of the guest bed, the sunlight falling in lazy lines across the quilt. Her fingers hesitated at the flap. She didn't open it right away. The farm had started to feel strangely familiar, its rhythm of work, its honest silences. Nathan didn't talk much, but he listened. And June, though still guarded, had started asking questions at dinner, even if they came wrapped in sarcasm. It wasn't home, but it didn't feel like nowhere anymore either. She finally broke the seal and pulled out the single page inside. Her father's writing covered both sides, tight, controlled, but more personal this time. Not about war, not about survival. This letter was about Nathan. He remembered his name after all, Nathan Hayes, the farmer with the scar near his right wrist, the one who offered him a bed, a bowl of stew, and a ride to the next town without ever asking for anything in return. Her father had spent years trying to track him down, always coming up short. The war had taken more than blood and friends. It had taken memory, faces blurred, names vanished. But this man, Nathan, had stayed. And then came the part that made her hands shake. "He reminded me of who I wanted to be, Claire. If you ever lose your way, find him. Not because he owes you, but because he understands what it means to keep going when everything feels lost. He lives like the world still matters." She folded the letter slowly, the words burning into her palms. Nathan didn't know he was more than a story. He didn't know he had been the North Star in a stranger's life, or that her father had clung to his memory like a moral compass. And Claire wasn't ready to tell him, not yet. Not when things were just starting to breathe between them, not when the truth might sound too much like a reason to stay. So she tucked the letter back into its envelope and slid it into the drawer beside the bed. For now, she'd keep it there, safe, silent, and waiting, just like the rest of the story. The afternoon sun hung low, casting long amber shadows across the fields. Nathan stood at the edge of the property where the rows of corn gave way to wild thistle and crabgrass. It was a forgotten corner, part of the land no longer tilled, not because it was useless, but because it held something older than crops, something he hadn't disturbed in years. He hadn't planned to come here. He'd meant to check the fencing along the south line, but his boots had carried him here instead, guided by a feeling he hadn't felt in a long time, a whisper of memory, tugging at the edges of thought like a coat sleeve in the wind. The cottonwood tree still stood tall, though its bark was weathered and cracked. At its base, half covered in weeds, lay the faint outline of an old wooden crate, warped from years of rain and son. Nathan knelt slowly, his knees creaking louder than the box's lid as he pulled it open. Inside, the paper had yellowed, but the ink had held. Letters, dozens of them, bound with twine, wrapped in oilskin, and tucked alongside a few fading photographs. They were written in another life, one that had never felt real outside of memory. Soldiers had called him Hayes back then, or Doc, or just you. Names didn't matter as much in foxholes. He picked up one letter, the writing sharp and hurried. From a man named Benton. He stared at it. It was short, just a scrawl of gratitude from a hospital cot, thanking him for the bandage, the food, the joke about bad coffee that made the pain feel distant for a second. Benton hadn't said much. Most didn't. But the signature at the bottom matched the one in Claire's letter. Thomas Benton. Nathan sat back, the wind rustling the grass around him, and for a moment the war wasn't decades behind him. It was right here, pressed into paper, buried beneath the roots, echoing through time. He hadn't remembered the name. Not until now. He put the letter back in the box carefully, like tucking in a child. Claire hadn't come chasing a ghost. She had come to find a piece of her father, and Nathan had unknowingly held it all along. The barn was quiet that afternoon, lit only by strips of sunlight slanting through the slats in the walls. Dust motes hung lazily in the warm air, swirling with each soft step June took across the wooden floor. She'd come out looking for a hammer. Nathan had asked her to help repair the chicken coop, but instead she found a stack of old boxes tucked behind the workbench, half covered by a paint-splattered tarp and years of disinterest. Curiosity outweighed the chore. She pulled the tarp back gently, revealing a collection of old keepsakes, mason jars filled with bolts, faded seed catalogs, and a warped tin box with a broken latch. She pried it open with a screwdriver, expecting more rusted nails or forgotten parts. Instead, there were photographs, black and white, some curled at the edges, others stained with watermarks, but still intact. Most showed unfamiliar faces, soldiers standing in muddy fields leaning against tanks, sitting on crates with cigarettes between their fingers and weariness in their eyes. She sifted through them slowly, holding each one with quiet reverence. These weren't just images. They were stories sealed in silence. One in particular made her pause. Two young men stood side by side, arms slung casually over each other's shoulders. One of them was her grandfather, his chin set firm, a smirk tugging at one corner of his mouth, uniform crisp beneath a jacket too big for his frame. She recognized him from the mantel in the living room. The other man, though, his face was unfamiliar, but carried something sharp and distinct. On the back, in her father's handwriting, were just 3 words: Me and Benton, 1944. June's brow furrowed. Benton. The name rang loud now, Claire's last name. She stared at the photograph longer, a chill settling down her spine even though the air was warm. This wasn't coincidence. It wasn't just a tale Claire had carried from a hospital bedside. Their stories had intersected long before she ever stepped foot on the farm. She clutched the photo tightly and stepped back into the sun, knowing she had to show her father, because sometimes the past doesn't just come knocking. Sometimes it leaves a picture behind, waiting for someone young and stubborn enough to dust it off and see it for what it is. A name etched in time, whispering through generations. Nathan sat on the porch that evening, elbows resting on his knees, a worn flannel draped over his shoulders. The air had cooled just enough to make the wood creak under him, and the sky above was turning that familiar shade of blue that only came right before darkness took hold. Fireflies blinked lazily near the fence line, and the soft cluck of chickens settling for the night echoed from the coop. Claire stood nearby, leaning against one of the porch beams, arms crossed, the photo June had found still clutched in her hand. She hadn't said much when she'd shown it to him, just held it out, the way one might offer proof that ghosts were real. Nathan had stared at it for a long time before setting it down on the table beside him. He knew the man in that picture. He knew the weight of that memory. He cleared his throat, the words hard in his chest. "It was late in the war," he said quietly. "Winter. France, I think. Everything was snow and mud. I was young. Too young to know what I was doing, but old enough to pretend I did." Claire didn't speak. She just listened. "We were moving through this village, half burned, already cleared once, but something felt wrong. I was on a supply run when I heard shouting. Gunfire. One of our guys had wandered too far from the rest, got hit. Bad." Nathan's voice dropped lower, rougher. "I didn't think. I just went. Found him bleeding behind a crumbled stone wall. Didn't even know his name." He paused, staring out at the fields. "He kept trying to talk. Kept saying something about home, about his dad. I don't know what held me together, but I dragged him out. Carried him over my back like he weighed nothing. Got him to a medic and never saw him again. Never knew if he made it." Claire's voice was barely a whisper. "He did." Nathan nodded slowly, emotion tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Guess I know that now." She stepped closer, her voice softer. "That man was my father." Nathan looked up at her then, and something shifted between them. An invisible wall, worn thin by time, finally giving way. The past, buried so deep beneath acres of silence, had bloomed into something neither of them had seen coming. "I always wondered if it mattered," he said, "if one act like that could really change anything." Claire blinked back, the wetness gathering in her eyes. It changed everything. And in that quiet moment, beneath a sky filled with stars just starting to appear, the man who had saved a life finally met the reason it was worth saving. The night was still when she told him, no cicadas, no breeze, just the sound of an old porch swing creaking beneath the weight of two people who didn't know how to start saying what mattered. Claire sat with her knees pulled up slightly, hugging a mug of tea that had long gone cold. Nathan leaned back, hat low over his brow, his eyes on the stars like they might deliver a truth gentler than the one hanging between them. "I didn't come just because of the letters," Claire said quietly. Nathan didn't move, didn't press. He waited like the land itself, silent, patient, weathered. "I told myself I came to find the man who saved my father," she continued, her voice just above a whisper. "And that was part of it. But only part." He turned his head, watching her now. "My dad passed 6 months ago," she said, the words slow and steady, like walking across ice. "Cancer. He fought like hell. But near the end, he stopped fighting. He started talking instead, about you, about this place, about how one man's kindness reminded him what kind of life he wanted to build. He told me that I'd know what he meant if I ever felt lost." Nathan stayed quiet, the porch swing groaning as it shifted slightly beneath them. "And I was lost, Nathan," she said. "Not just after he died. Before that, even. I was engaged to someone who looked perfect from the outside. Big smile, beautiful apartment, knew how to shake hands and sell promises, but I was shrinking by the day, giving up pieces of myself to make him more comfortable." Nathan frowned, his jaw tightening just a little. She noticed. "I walked away 3 weeks before the wedding," she said. "Called it off, lost half our friends, some of my job prospects, but I couldn't marry someone who didn't see me, not really. And after the funeral, when the silence got too loud, I remembered the stories, the letters, the man who never asked for anything, but gave everything anyway." She turned toward him now, her eyes clearer than they'd been since she arrived. "I needed to remember what it looked like to live with purpose, to be rooted in something, to stop performing and start being." Nathan looked at her for a long moment, the corners of his eyes softening. "You think I've got answers?" he asked, almost teasing. Claire smiled faintly. "No, but I think you're living a life that isn't about noise. And I needed to see if that kind of life was real, because maybe I want to build one too." Nathan nodded slowly, a breath escaping like the weight of something he hadn't even noticed he'd been holding. "Well," he said, tilting his mug, "you picked a hell of a place to figure it out." And in the silence that followed, there was no judgment, no fixing. Just two people sitting under a sky wide enough to hold all all their unfinished stories, searching quietly for the ones worth keeping. The farmer's market buzzed with life in that familiar small-town way, casual and honest, like no one was in a hurry because they all had time to stop and talk. Folding tables lined the gravel lot beside the old church, covered in homemade jams, fresh tomatoes, patchy quilts, and sunflowers in mason jars. Children darted between stalls with sticky hands and oversized lemonade cups. The smell of warm cinnamon bread drifted through the air, carried by laughter and gossip as easy as the breeze. Claire followed Nathan through the crowd, a canvas tote slung over her shoulder, still getting used to how people here said hello like they'd known her for years. Nathan offered short nods to everyone, sometimes a grunt, sometimes a full sentence. But Claire noticed how they looked at him, not with obligation, with respect. At the honey stand, a woman with silver hair and bright eyes beamed the moment she saw them. "Well, if it isn't Nathan Hayes," she said, wiping her hands on her apron, "and this must be the guest we've heard about." Claire extended a hand. "Claire, just visiting." The woman took it warmly. "Lucille, you staying out at the Hayes place?" Claire nodded. "For a little while." Lucille smiled knowingly. "Well, if you're smart, you'll learn all you can from him. Your timing's good, too. Man's finally letting the world peek in again." Claire tilted her head. "What do you mean?" Lucille leaned on her counter. "Oh, he won't say it, but folks remember. That boy helped rebuild old Henry's barn after the fire and never took a dime. Dropped off groceries on porches all through the winter when the highway iced over. And when I broke my hip last year, he fixed the steps on my porch before I even got home from the hospital." Claire glanced over at Nathan, who had wandered ahead to the produce table like he couldn't hear a word of it. "He doesn't want thanks," Lucille continued, eyes soft. "Doesn't know what to do with it, but this town remembers, always does." As they moved through the crowd, more people waved. A shopkeeper offered Claire a jar of pickles, "on the house since you're with Hayes." A retired vet told her how Nathan once saved his dog after a car accident, carrying the limping animal 2 miles to the vet's house when no one else was home. Every story was another piece of a man who never talked much but always showed up. Back at the truck, Claire loaded the bags quietly, her thoughts as full as the tote on her arm. "You didn't tell me you were the local legend," she said. Watching Nathan tie down the last crate of corn, he glanced at her, unimpressed. "They just like telling stories." "Yeah," she said softly, "but not all stories get remembered unless they matter." Nathan didn't answer, but the look he gave her, half a smile, half a shrug, was all the confirmation she needed. In this town, kindness didn't need a headline, it just needed time, and the right eyes to see it. The cemetery sat just outside the edge of town, tucked beneath a cluster of old maples that swayed gently in the afternoon breeze. The grass was soft and well kept, the kind of quiet that didn't feel empty, just still. A gravel path wound its way between rows of modest headstones, each one carrying names and dates like fragments of lives still echoing in someone's heart. Claire led the way, a folded bouquet of wildflowers in her hands. She walked slowly, like her footsteps didn't want to reach the end just yet. Nathan followed a few steps behind, his cap in his hand, the weight of something small and metallic tucked into his pocket. They didn't talk much on the drive over. Some moments earned their silence. When they reached the grave, Claire knelt down. The stone was simple, Thomas Benton. The inscription beneath read, "Beloved Father, brave soul, gentle hands." She placed the flowers gently at its base, smoothing the stems against the stone as if tucking him in. Nathan stood nearby, hands in his pockets, eyes locked on the name. Claire looked up. "This is the first time I've brought someone here." He nodded. "Thank you for letting me come." She stood, brushing dirt from her jeans. "He would have wanted it. He talked about you more than I ever realized, especially at the end." Nathan stepped closer, pulling the object from his pocket. A pair of dog tags, worn, dulled with age, the chain slightly frayed. He held them for a moment, rubbing a thumb over the faded lettering. "They issued me 2, he said, his voice low. "One stayed on me during the war. This one, I kept it after, as a reminder of who I was before everything changed." He crouched down and gently placed the tags at the foot of the stone beside the flowers. "Your dad was the first person I ever pulled out of the fire and didn't lose. I didn't know his name until now, but he was the first." Claire's eyes shimmered. She didn't try to hide it. Nathan stood again, looking down at the grave with a kind of reverence usually reserved for cathedrals. "I think I needed to come here more than I knew." Claire slipped her hand into his, not searching, not asking, just connecting, grounding. They stood together side by side as the wind stirred the trees above them. No grand speeches, no closure with a bow, just 2 lives gently woven together by an old act of courage and the quiet courage it took to return. And somewhere beneath the earth, between the stone and the soil, it felt like a circle had quietly closed. The sun had long dipped beneath the horizon, but the heat still clung to the porch rails and the wood beneath their feet. Crickets sang their twilight song in the grass, and fireflies blinked like slow, thoughtful signals from a quieter world, the kind of night that wrapped around you gentle and unhurried. Nathan sat in his usual spot, boots off, socked feet stretched out in front of him, one arm draped lazily over the back of the swing. Claire leaned against the porch post, her glass of sweet tea half full, her bare feet dangling over the steps. They hadn't said much since dinner, and for once it wasn't because the past was heavy. It was because the stillness was enough. Claire broke the silence first, her voice low. "When I was a kid, I used to think fireflies were angels, little ones, too busy for wings." Nathan smiled, eyes following the soft flickers above the field. "June used to try catching 'em in jars, said she'd build a whole city if she could." Claire watched one settle briefly on the railing before lifting off again. "I used to dream about what came next. College, marriage, a fast-paced life full of plans and airports and meetings with windows that didn't open." Nathan raised an eyebrow. "Sounds exhausting." It was, and I wasn't even in it yet. She paused. "Then everything broke, and somehow I ended up here, on a porch, drinking tea, watching bugs." He chuckled softly. "Life has a way of course correcting." She looked at him. "Do you believe in second chances?" Nathan didn't answer right away. He stared out into the dark where the fireflies danced, weightless, slow, untouchable. "I believe in quiet ones," he said, "the kind that don't announce themselves, the ones that come in with muddy boots and awkward silences. You don't even know it's a second chance until you're already living it." Claire smiled gently. "That's what this feels like. Not just a visit or a detour. Something's shifting." He turned his head toward her. "So what comes next?" She shrugged, but there was something sure behind it. "I don't know. But I'm not running from it this time. And I'm not chasing anything either. I'm just walking toward it." Nathan nodded, thoughtful. "That's all life really is. Showing up again, even when it's quiet, especially when it's quiet." The porch creaked as the swing rocked slowly. Fireflies blinked across the field like small glowing truths, brief, beautiful, and honest. And somewhere in that slow golden hush, something new began to grow. Not in loud declarations, not in perfect timing, but in presence. And that was enough. The morning started like most others on the farm, quiet, humid, and thick with the smell of dew settling on warm earth. Nathan was halfway through his second cup of coffee when the call came from the neighboring property. Old Mr. Thatcher's voice, breathless and alarmed, cracked through the receiver. "Nathan, you got cows on the road? Yours, I think. East fence is down." Nathan muttered a curse under his breath, grabbed his boots, and was out the door in less than a minute. Claire, still tying her hair back at the kitchen sink, caught the urgency in his footsteps and followed without question. The east fence. That old stretch along the ravine had been sagging for weeks, but there was always something else more urgent to fix. Now, the wire had given way completely, and half the cattle had taken the opportunity for an unsupervised field trip. By the time they reached the fence line, the sun had already begun its climb, casting sharp light across the road where 3 black and white steers stood staring dumbly at a mailbox. A few more grazed in a neighbor's pasture, tails flicking, entirely unbothered by the chaos they'd caused. Nathan jumped out of the truck, cursing under his breath as he surveyed the damage. Perfect. Just perfect. Claire followed, already pulling on a pair of gloves. "What do you need me to do?" He hesitated. She'd helped with chores, sure, but rounding up livestock? That wasn't beginner's work. "Keep them from heading toward the road," he said finally. "That's priority number 1. But Claire didn't just hold the line. She moved fast, sharp, alert. Her heels dug into the dirt as she angled her body just right, arms out, voice steady but firm, as she directed the steers with surprising confidence. One tried to bolt left, she intercepted. Another started toward a low ditch. She clapped her hands sharply and redirected it without spooking the others. Nathan watched from the fence, eyebrows raised. "You done this before?" She smirked, breathless. "Horseback riding camp. Turns out chasing wayward cows isn't so different from herding stubborn teenagers on ponies." Together, they guided the cattle back through the break in the fence, Claire waving her arms, Nathan whistling low and steady. By the time the last steer was safely inside, the sun was high and their clothes were streaked with mud, sweat, and satisfaction. They stood by the torn fence, breathing hard, hands on hips. Claire's ponytail was falling out, a strand of hay clinging to her shirt. Nathan looked at her, this city girl who had somehow gone from lost guest to part of the rhythm here, and shook his head with a small grin. "You keep this up, I'll be out of a job." She laughed, wiping her brow. "Not a chance. But maybe you don't have to do all of it alone anymore." He didn't reply right away, just nodded, the corners of his mouth tugging up as he reached for a post-hole digger. The fence could be rebuilt, but it was what couldn't be fixed with tools, trust, resilience, unexpected grit, that lingered loudest that day. And in the quiet space between hammer swings and soft laughter, Nathan realized something he hadn't dared admit until now. She wasn't passing through. She was leaning in. The sky gave no warning this time. One moment they were out by the garden patch pulling weeds and laughing about June's latest sarcastic observation. The next, the wind picked up and the first drops fell, soft, cold, and fast. Claire looked up just as the clouds cracked open. Rain poured like someone had split the sky in half. Nathan grabbed her hand without thinking. "Come on." They ran together toward the barn, boots slapping mud, Claire's laugh trailing behind them like music. They ducked under the awning just as the storm unleashed everything it had. Thunder rolled in the distance, low and familiar, as water beat down on the tin roof in rhythmic waves. Breathing hard, soaked and grinning, they stood in the doorway watching the downpour. Claire wiped wet strands of hair from her face. "You've got the worst luck with weather, you know." Nathan chuckled, voice rough. "I think it's just timing. Seems to hit when you're around." She nudged him lightly with her shoulder. "Maybe the sky's just trying to make a point." Silence settled between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt suspended, like the rain had built a bubble around them and nothing else could get in. Nathan's shirt clung to him, hair damp, eyes darker in the soft gray light. Claire glanced at him, then quickly away, like looking too long might let something out neither of them were ready for. He finally spoke, softer now. "You think you'll stay after the week?" Claire didn't answer right away. The question hung in the space between thunder and breath. She looked at him, really looked. "I think I might want to." He nodded once, not pressing, just holding that moment with her. The rain kept falling, steady and loud. And in the hush that followed their words, something unspoken passed between them. Not a confession, not a promise, but something gentler, a knowing. The kind of moment neither of them would dare call love. But both would remember it that way. The smell of garlic and roasted vegetables filled the farmhouse by sunset, weaving through every room like a warm invitation. Claire moved confidently in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, hair pinned back, her phone propped against the windowsill playing soft music as she stirred, chopped, and tasted. It had been years since she'd cooked like this, for someone else, not just herself. And something about the creaky floorboards and the way the house creaked as it settled made her want to get every detail right. Nathan leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching her with quiet amusement. "You sure you're not secretly a chef?" Claire shot him a glance. "Please, I just know how to read a recipe and not burn the place down. That's my gift." June entered from the porch, eyeing the spread on the table. A roast chicken surrounded by rosemary potatoes, sautéed green beans, and a small dish of peach cobbler waiting near the window to cool. Her guard was still up, but her nose betrayed her. She looked impressed. Claire set the final plate down. "All right, grab a seat before it gets cold." They sat together, the three of them, for the first time at the same table. At first it was quiet, just the clink of forks and the occasional polite compliment. But then Claire told a story, something about a disastrous cooking class in college involving a flambéed towel and a panicked fire alarm. And Nathan laughed. Not a chuckle, not a polite breath through the nose, but an honest, full laugh that cracked open the room. June smiled, then added her own commentary. Claire played along, building off their jokes with ease. Soon there was warmth at the table that had nothing to do with the food. It was the kind of dinner where seconds were offered without asking, and silence was filled not with obligation, but with stories. By the time dishes were cleared and the last of the cobbler scraped clean, the house felt fuller, like it had stretched its arms for the first time in years. Nathan caught Claire's eye as June wandered off to get ready for bed. "You didn't just cook dinner," he said quietly. "You brought the house back to life." Claire smiled. Maybe it just needed a little seasoning. The knock on the door came mid-morning, sharp and official, cutting through the calm like a bad memory returning too early. Nathan opened it to find a man in a pressed shirt and polished shoes, holding a folder too thick to mean anything good. Harold Finch, bank representative, second generation in the loan business, and as sympathetic as concrete. Claire watched from the kitchen as Nathan stepped onto the porch. Their voices were low, but the tone was unmistakable, tight, restrained, edged with tension. She didn't need to hear the words to recognize the rhythm of bad news. Nathan's shoulders stiffened with each sentence, and the moment the door clicked shut again, the quiet inside the house changed. He set the folder on the table without looking at it. Claire approached carefully. "How bad?" she asked. Nathan didn't answer at first. He stared out the window, eyes fixed on the farthest edge of the field, like the answer might be hiding in the crops. 3 weeks, he said finally. "That's the deadline. I either catch up on the missed payments or start selling." Claire's throat tightened. "Selling the land?" He nodded once. "Just a piece. Maybe the East Acres. They've been underproducing anyway. Could buy me time." "But it's your family's farm," she said gently. "I know," he replied. "And I'd rather lose part of it than all of it. But if I sell, I'm giving up the land my grandfather worked, the same field where my father taught me to plant. It's more than dirt, Claire. It's memory." She wanted to fix it, wanted to say, "We'll figure it out," but she knew that wasn't what he needed. He needed truth and space. Instead, she reached for his hand. "Whatever happens, you won't go through it alone." Nathan looked at her then, his expression worn but grateful. The weight of the years pressed heavy on his shoulders, but for once it wasn't only his to carry. Outside, the fields whispered with the wind, unaware of deadlines or debt, but inside the house the clock had started ticking, and the choices ahead would shape more than just the soil. The tension in the house settled like dust that wouldn't sweep away. After the visit from the bank, Nathan had gone quieter than usual. He worked longer hours, fixed things that didn't need fixing, and ate dinner without tasting it. Claire gave him space, but it sat between them like a locked door neither knew how to open. That evening she found him in the barn, oiling the hinges on a feed bin that hadn't creaked in years. His sleeves were rolled up, the light catching the edge of a scar on his forearm she hadn't noticed before. He didn't look up when she stepped in. "I've been thinking," she began, careful not to spook the moment. "I've still got some savings, enough to cover what the bank needs, and then some." Nathan's hands froze. Slowly, he set the oil can down. "Claire." She stepped closer. "You wouldn't be taking it. I'd be giving it. My dad spent his life trying to find you, trying to repay a kindness. Maybe this is how it comes full circle." He turned to face her, jaw tight. "That's not your burden." "It's not a burden," she said. "It's a choice, and I want to help." Nathan shook his head. "You think I haven't had people try to help before? Investors, developers, people who smile while they measure how much they can carve out of me. I'm not them." "I know," he said, softer now. "But if I take your money, this place stops being mine. Even if you never say a word about it, I'll know. I'll feel it every time I walk the fields." Claire's chest tightened. "Then what's the alternative? Selling pieces of your history just to buy a little time?" Nathan didn't answer right away. He rubbed his hands on a rag, more to keep them busy than to clean them. Sometimes a man has to carry what's his to carry. Claire stepped back, her eyes stinging, and sometimes the strongest thing you can do is let someone carry it with you. But he didn't move, didn't speak. The silence between them was no longer soft. It was full of all the things they couldn't agree on, even as something deeper tethered them together. The barn, once a quiet refuge, now echoed with pride, pain, and the sound of a door quietly closing, for now. The argument still lingered in the air the next morning, even though no one spoke of it. Claire moved around the kitchen with practiced calm, but the usual rhythm felt hollow. Nathan sat on the porch steps, coffee growing cold in his hands, eyes fixed on the horizon. The silence between them wasn't sharp anymore, but it had weight. June came in late from the chicken coop, hair wild from the wind, boots still caked in mud. She dropped the pail of eggs on the counter harder than necessary and looked at them both. "Are you two going to keep pretending this isn't happening?" she asked, blunt and unfiltered. Nathan blinked. "What are you talking about?" June crossed her arms. "Claire's trying to help, and you're acting like she's here to take something from us." Nathan stood, voice steady. "It's not that simple." June shook her head. "It is to me. She's been here every morning helping with chores. She listens to my stories. She made dinner that actually tasted like food. And I haven't seen you smile this much since—" She stopped herself. The unspoken name hung heavy. Claire looked down, her heart tightening, but June wasn't done. "You push people away, Dad. You always have. But she's not a threat. She's not trying to change everything. She's just trying to care. And maybe you don't know what to do with that. But maybe you should stop pretending like we don't need it." Nathan's breath caught. He looked at his daughter, not as the child he protected, but as someone suddenly older, wiser. "She's not Mom," June said more gently now, "and she's not trying to be. But I think Mom would have liked her." Claire's eyes filled, but she stayed silent. Nathan looked at them both, the woman offering help, and the daughter reminding him what strength really looked like. The pride he thought he was protecting now felt small next to the love being handed to him, no strings attached. And for the first time, he wasn't sure what to say. Because his daughter had spoken the truth he wasn't ready to face. He was loved, and he was running from it. The attic door creaked open with the kind of reluctance that made Claire smile. Dust floated in the single shaft of light that pierced the dim space, illuminating the layers of time packed into every box and beam. June had suggested they dig around for old quilts, something fun, something light, but what they found instead shifted everything. Nathan climbed the narrow steps behind them, muttering about how the insulation needed redoing. He hadn't been up there in years. The attic had always been a space filled with forgotten things, old furniture, childhood toys, memories too fragile to touch. Claire opened a cracked trunk tucked beneath a tarp. Inside were bundles of letters tied in string, yellowed and brittle at the edges. Postmarks stamped from bases across Europe, names she didn't recognize, but one stood out. Benton. T. Her fingers trembled as she lifted it. Nathan stepped closer, his brow furrowing. "That's his handwriting." She nodded, gently untying the string. Inside were pages upon pages of his father's voice, descriptions of the war, of men who didn't come back, of one man who saved his life when everything else was falling apart. There were photos, too, grainy black and whites of soldiers sitting in trenches, smiling like boys, unaware of the world they'd returned to. One showed Nathan, unmistakably younger, standing next to Claire's father, their arms draped over each other's shoulders like brothers. Claire looked up at him. "You remembered him, even when you thought you didn't." Nathan sat down slowly on a wooden crate, the photo in his hands. He stared at it for a long moment, silent. "I tried to forget a lot of it," he said softly. "Didn't think it mattered. Didn't think anyone needed to remember." Claire knelt beside him. He remembered, every day. You were the man who reminded him the world could still be good. The attic was quiet except for the creak of wood beneath them and the soft crackle of paper between fingers. What they'd found wasn't just proof. It was confirmation. That kindness had echoed through decades. That one moment had changed more than one life, and now finally the story had come full circle. Claire didn't plan on writing the article, not at first. It began as a journal entry, a way to process everything she had seen and felt since arriving at the farm. But the more she wrote, the more the story pulled itself forward. Her father's memories, Nathan's quiet sacrifices, June's fierce love, a farm holding its ground against time, grief, and debt. It wasn't just personal anymore, it was universal. She submitted it on a whim. Late at night, coffee cold beside her, heart pounding as she hit send. The editor at Field and Found replied within 2 days, stunned by the depth and heart of the piece. 2 weeks later, Nathan's story was live. It spread quickly, shared across social media, picked up by regional news outlets, reprinted in full by a major Sunday magazine. Claire titled it, "The Farmer Who Saved My Father and Kept Saving Long After the War." Photos from the attic were included. The letter from her dad. A quiet profile of Nathan, half shadowed by the barn door, sleeves rolled up, looking like a man who never asked to be seen, but finally had been. Nathan read it once, sitting at the kitchen table with the paper spread before him. He said very little, but Claire noticed the way he ran his hand over his jaw more times than usual, the way he blinked and cleared his throat at the part about June. "I didn't ask for all this," he murmured. "I know," Claire said gently, "but it found you anyway." Calls started coming in, strangers asking how they could help. A veteran in Colorado mailed a letter thanking Nathan for being the kind of man he wished he'd known. Someone anonymously covered the past due loan at the bank. Claire stood on the porch one evening and watched as a local news van pulled into the gravel driveway. Nathan sighed behind her. "You okay?" she asked. He looked at her, eyes soft, voice low. "I'm still not used to being the story." Claire smiled. "Maybe, but you were always worth telling." The flyer showed up in the post office window first. Bright blue with bold letters. Hayes Farm Harvest Festival. Help us keep it growing. Then it was taped to diner menus, pinned to bulletin boards at the church, and slipped under windshield wipers downtown. Claire hadn't organized it. Neither had Nathan. The town did. Lucille from the honey stand, Pete from the feed store, the high school principal, even the mayor. They all pitched in, calling it a community thank you, but everyone knew it was something more. On the morning of the festival, the fields around the Hayes property came alive. Folding tables were set up with homemade pies, jam jars, and woven baskets full of squash and corn. A stage made of hay bales became the center of the event, where a local band played bluegrass and teenagers took turns dancing barefoot in the grass. Nathan stood near the barn, arms crossed, overwhelmed. He watched June laugh with friends from school, a plate of peach cobbler in her hand. Claire moved through the crowd with ease, hugging people she hadn't met a month ago. He barely recognized the energy around him, lively, warm, proud. A donation jar sat near the entrance. By midday, it was already filled twice over. Then came the auction. Handcrafted benches, baskets, quilts, all donated. But the biggest surprise came when someone unveiled an old photo of Nathan and Thomas Benton, beautifully framed, with a placard that read, "A life remembered, a life still giving." It sold to a local cafe owner who swore she'd hang it right above the register. Nathan tried to protest, quietly, with a few polite waves of the hand, but the crowd wouldn't let him retreat. Not today. Claire joined him as the sun began to dip. "You see this?" she said, gesturing to the rows of people, dancing, talking, giving. "This is what happens when someone finally sees the man we've all seen since the beginning." Nathan looked around, jaw clenched, to hold back emotion. He nodded once, slow. "It's not just my farm anymore," he said. Claire smiled. It never was. The house was too quiet the next morning, the kind of quiet that wraps itself around a thought and won't let go. Claire stood at the edge of the guest bed, suitcase open, her clothes neatly folded beside it. She hadn't told Nathan, hadn't even told June, but the story was out. The fundraiser had saved the farm, and in her mind, her part was over. The truth was harder to admit. She was afraid. Afraid that now, without something to fix, she'd become a burden, that her presence might start to feel like clutter in a house that was finally healing. She moved slowly, placing shirts and books into the case with mechanical calm. The piano in the shed, the muddy boots on the porch, the way Nathan looked at her sometimes and then looked away. None of it made sense in goodbye terms, but she tried to make peace with that. When she opened the nightstand drawer to grab her charger, she found it. A folded sheet of notebook paper, her name written in pencil, soft and crooked. It was from June. "Claire, you don't have to leave. You helped fix more than just fences and dinners. You fixed the quiet in this house. I haven't heard Dad laugh like that since Mom. I haven't felt this light in years. Please stay." June. Claire sat down hard on the bed, the note trembling in her hand. A tear slipped down her cheek, not from sadness, but from the weight of being seen, truly seen, in a place she thought she'd only borrowed. Downstairs, she heard footsteps, Nathan's slow, steady gait crossing the kitchen floor. She stood, walked to the window, and watched the morning unfold. The cows meandered in the field. A breeze stirred the curtains, and for the first time since arriving, she stopped thinking about when to leave. She started thinking about how to stay. The soil was soft beneath his boots, dark and damp from a light rain the night before. Nathan walked the rows in silence, a canvas sack slung over one shoulder, seed packets crinkling quietly inside. The morning was still, the sky brushed with gold, and the smell of tilled earth filled the air like memory. He'd done this 100 times, planted hope one seed at a time. But today it felt different. The ground felt alive in a new way, like it had finally exhaled, and maybe so had he. Each row he planted carried more than seeds. They carried the ghosts of every season before, of his father's slow, patient steps, of his grandfather's calloused hands and quiet wisdom, of Emily's laughter as she balanced June on her hip, watching him from the edge of the porch, and now of Claire's muddy boots, her laughter under storm clouds, her voice reading aloud from old letters by lantern light. The land had seen it all: grief, love, abandonment, return. Nathan dropped to one knee, pressing another line of seed into the earth. He paused, dirt clinging to his fingers. It had taken him years to realize the farm wasn't just his responsibility, it was his witness. It remembered everything he tried to forget. It held him accountable, even in silence. And now, after everything, it was offering something back. A chance. He looked up and saw June in the distance, tossing feed near the chicken coop, hair tangled in the wind. Claire was by the shed, sleeves rolled, laughing with one of the neighbors who'd come to help repair a fence post. Life didn't feel paused anymore, it felt planted. Nathan stood slowly, wiping his hands on his jeans, the sun warming his back. This field had once been a burden. Now it felt like a promise. And as he pressed the next seed into the earth, he whispered something no one else could hear, just 3 simple words meant only for the land: I'm still here. The evening light stretched long across the fields, casting gold over the edges of the barn, the porch, the rows just beginning to sprout with green. It was the kind of light that made things feel softer, more forgiving. Nathan stood near the edge of the property, hat in hand, the same spot where he'd first seen her walking through the cornfield weeks ago, her eyes red, her voice shaky, asking if he was the man her father remembered. Claire was there again now, standing beside him, arms crossed gently, watching the sun slip behind the hills. They hadn't said much, not yet. But the quiet between them no longer felt like hesitation. It felt like something waiting to be spoken. Nathan looked at her, took a breath. I thought I knew how the rest of my life would go. Claire turned to him. And now? He hesitated, not out of fear, but because the words mattered more than most. Now I don't want it to go without you in it. She didn't speak right away. Her eyes shimmered just slightly, but she held his gaze, waiting. I know I can be hard-headed, he said, voice low. Slow to say what needs saying. I've spent years surviving, not living. But since you came, this place, me, it's been waking up. Claire stepped closer. I didn't come here to change your life, Nathan. He smiled, soft and real. I know. That's what changed it. She reached for his hand, and he took it, rough palms meeting her softer ones, like puzzle pieces that had been waiting years to find their fit. The wind moved gently through the rows, and overhead the first stars began to appear. Nathan looked up, then back at her. I don't want you to leave. Claire didn't answer with words. She didn't need to. She leaned forward, rested her forehead against his, and in that still moment, under the wide, forgiving sky, a love that neither of them planned for, expected, or chased, simply grew anyway. The fields were full now, row after row of green stretching wide beneath a summer sun that didn't feel like a threat anymore. Chickens wandered freely near the barn. The garden had doubled in size, and laughter, real, whole laughter, often echoed from the porch where June liked to sit and tease Nathan about his uneven tan lines. The house felt different too, not just cleaner or brighter. Lived in, loved. Claire was still there, still waking up early to feed the chickens with June, still humming while she cooked, still planting wildflowers along the fence like she planned to be around long enough to see them bloom. And Nathan, well, he smiled more, laughed easier, held her hand like he never wanted to let go. They hadn't spoken about the next step in any grand, romantic way, but it was clear in the way they moved around each other, in the quiet glances, the shared chores, the peace that settled between them each night like a well-worn quilt. One morning, while sorting through the mail at the kitchen table, Claire paused. A cream-colored envelope sat among the usual flyers and feed bills, handwritten, no return address, just a name. Nathan Hayes. Inside was a short letter, the handwriting neat but nervous. Dear Mr. Hayes, my father never forgot the farmer who carried him to safety. He passed recently, but he spoke of you often, how your kindness gave him something to hold on to. I only found your name after reading the article. I was wondering if I might come visit the place he talked about all my life." Claire looked up, eyes wide. Nathan took the letter, read it slowly, then folded it with care. "She's coming," he said quietly. Claire smiled, just like I did. Nathan nodded, his voice steady. "And she'll be welcome here." Outside, June laughed at something near the coop, her joy ringing out like wind chimes. The land had healed, but more than that, it had become home again, not just because of crops or fences or fresh paint on the porch, but because love had rooted itself deep in the soil, and once it did, it grew everything around it.